The maternity dress arrived in a gold-trimmed box with no return address. Amara Lennox Bake set it on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long moment before she opened it. Inside, folded beneath white tissue paper, was a cream silk dress 2 sizes too small. Wrapped around it was a handwritten note on ivory cardstock, the penmanship careful and deliberate, the kind of handwriting that belongs to a woman who wants you to know she has time to be precise. He told me you've let yourself go. I thought this might motivate you. Enjoy what's left of the pregnancy. The nursery won't be yours much longer. No signature. It didn't need one. Amara read it twice. Then she set it down, poured herself a glass of water, and stood at the kitchen window, watching the Seattle rain drag itself across Elliott Bay. 33 weeks pregnant, 36 years old, and married to a man who thought she was sleeping. She had never been more awake in her life. If you've ever loved someone who turned out to be a stranger wearing a familiar face, stay with me. Because this story isn't about a cheating husband. It's about what one woman found when she went looking for the truth, and what she chose to do with it when it was worse than anything she'd imagined. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Hit that like button. And drop your city and country in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. People are watching from places I never expected, and every comment tells me you're still here. Don't go anywhere. The dress went into the trash compactor. The note went into a folder Amara had labeled, in her own careful handwriting, Evidence Personal. It was the 14th item in that folder. She had started the folder 6 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday evening when Si-hwan left his laptop open on the dining room table and walked upstairs to take a phone call. He'd been doing that more often lately, stepping out of rooms to speak, lowering his voice in ways he probably didn't realize she noticed. Amara noticed everything. She always had. It was one of the things Si-hwan had loved about her in the beginning and had apparently forgotten about entirely in the years since. She had not intended to look at the laptop. She'd been walking past it to refill her water glass. But the screen was open to a wire transfer confirmation, and the name in the recipient field stopped her cold. Si-hwan Consulting Group, LLC, $340,000. Amara stood there with one hand on her pregnant belly and the other braced against the table edge. She knew every legitimate vendor and contractor connected to Bake Meridian Holdings. 12 years of marriage to a shipping magnate meant 12 years of dinner conversations about contracts, acquisitions, and operating costs. She had never been given an official role in the company. Si-hwan believed in clean separations between business and home, but she had listened. Carefully, consistently. She had never heard of Si-hwan Consulting Group. She took a photo of the screen with her phone. Then she walked to the kitchen, poured her water, and was standing at the counter looking at nothing when Si-hwan came back downstairs. "You look tired," he told her. "I am," she said. "The baby's been moving." He nodded and picked up his laptop without looking at the screen. He didn't kiss her. He hadn't done that in months, not in the casual absent way that meant nothing, but still meant something. He just walked back into his office and closed the door. Amara stood in the kitchen, listening to the click of the latch. Then she opened her phone and started searching. Si-hwan Consulting Group, LLC, had been registered in Delaware 14 months earlier. Its listed address was a postal service on a commercial strip in Bellevue. Its registered agent was a law firm Amara didn't recognize. Public filings listed one officer, Yoon Hae-rin. The name meant nothing to Amara that first night. It would mean everything within a week. She hired an investigator quietly through her cousin Malcolm Lennox, who had spent 8 years doing private security and knew people in the kind of work that didn't appear on professional directories. Malcolm was the sort of man who didn't ask too many questions at the front end, who waited until he had something real before he opened his mouth about it. Amara had always trusted him more than she trusted most people she'd known twice as long. "Don't tell me it's nothing," she said when she called him. "And don't tell me I'm being paranoid. When have I ever told you that?" Malcolm said. "Never." "Then we're good." Within 4 days, Malcolm's contact had pulled restaurant receipts, a hotel stay in Vancouver, a jewelry purchase at a boutique in Capitol Hill, a Tanzanite bracelet, $6,000 and 3 round-trip flights to Los Angeles. all booked under a personal credit card Amara had not known existed. By the end of the first week, she had a name, a face pulled from a professional LinkedIn profile, a sound like green wood splitting, and the address of a waterfront apartment in the Eastlake neighborhood that Si-hwan had apparently been paying for since the previous spring. Yoon Hae-rin was 31, Korean-American, a graduate of Northwestern with a master's from Columbia. Elegant in the way of someone who had worked hard to make elegance look effortless. In her profile photo, she was standing at a conference table, one hand resting on a presentation binder, smiling at something just outside the frame. She looked like someone who was used to getting what she wanted. Amara sat with that photo for a long time. She did not cry. She thought she might, but she didn't. What she felt instead was something quieter and more durable than grief. A slow, cold settling, like a building's foundation finally admitting the crack that has been there all along. She had been suspicious for the better part of a year. She had told herself it was pregnancy anxiety, hormones, the particular paranoia of a woman whose body no longer entirely belonged to herself. She had told herself a lot of things. She put down her phone. She pressed one hand against the side of her stomach and felt her son move, a slow, rolling pressure beneath her ribs. Okay, she said quietly. To him. To herself. She wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. The affair alone would have been enough. 12 years, 2 miscarriages. A pregnancy that had scared both of them badly enough that Si-hwan had sat on the edge of the hospital bed and held both her hands and said things Amara had believed completely, because she had no reason yet not to believe them. The affair alone would have been enough to end the marriage. But Amara kept digging, not out of masochism, not because she wanted more pain than she already had. She kept digging because something about the financial trail felt wrong, in a way that went beyond a man spending money on a mistress. The amounts were wrong. The routing was wrong. The structure of Yoon Consulting Group was wrong. Too formal, too carefully constructed for what appeared to be a personal expense account. She called Selena Wardell on a Wednesday morning while Si-hwan was at the office. Selena was 53, with a reputation in Seattle's legal community that preceded her into every room she entered. She had handled trust law for 30 years, had worked with the Baek family's independent trustees for the last 8 of those years, and had met Amara at a charity event 3 years earlier. They weren't close friends. They were the kind of women who recognized something in each other at a distance and kept track. I need to understand something about the legacy trust, Amara said without preamble. Specifically, what would happen if someone were moving protected assets through a shell company without trustee approval? There was a pause on Selena's end that lasted exactly long enough to tell Amara everything she needed to know about how seriously the question was being taken. Where are you? Selena asked. Home. I'll come to you. Selena arrived at 2 in the afternoon with a leather document case and the manner of someone who had delivered bad news to important people often enough that the delivering no longer rattled her, only the content of the news itself. The Baek Legacy Trust had been established by Jong-soo, Si-hwan's father, 17 years earlier as a generational protection structure. Its assets originally seeded with profits from the early years of Baek Meridianware, locked against personal use, accessible only for specific purposes, business continuity during crises, educational endowments for direct heirs, and long-term preservation of the terminal operations that anchored the family's legitimate business holdings. The trust's current value was close to $40 million. $8 million of those dollars were scheduled for transfer. Selena laid the documents on the dining table between them and walked Amara through what the forensic accountant had found in 3 days of work. The transfer had been structured in 4 stages, routed first through Yoon Consulting Group as a consulting fee, then through 2 additional holding entities before landing in an investment vehicle controlled by a man named Kwon Tae-mok. Amara did not know the name. You should, Selena said quietly. He runs a significant portion of the Korean trade network, operating out of Portland and Vancouver. He and Si-hwan have been territorial competitors for years. Amara looked at her across the table. Si-hwan is transferring money to his own rival. To a vehicle that rival controls, yes. The question is whether Si-hwan understands the end use. Selena folded her hands. What we know is that Taemok has been accumulating debt leverage against Rainier Eastport Terminal for the past 18 months. If that 8 million creates a manufactured shortfall in the trust's backing position. The terminal defaults, Amara said. Technically, yes. The trust holds a subordinate guarantee position on the terminal's operating credit. If the trust appears undercapitalized, Taemok steps in as a creditor and takes the terminal. Selena nodded once. Slowly, Amara sat back. Her son shifted inside her. She pressed her palm flat against her stomach without thinking about it. 1,800 people work that terminal, she said. 1,812, as of last quarter's payroll. Kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the rain had started again. What do I need, Amara said, to bring this to the trustees? Proof that Si-hwan knowingly directed protected assets toward this transfer. Selena's voice was even. Not circumstantial, not inferential, direct evidence of intent. And if I get it, then the trustees can strip him of his authority over protected assets. Permanently, she paused. There is also the question of the criminal exposure. Trust fraud of this magnitude. One thing at a time, Amara said. Selena looked at her carefully for a moment. You understand that he'll see what's coming when the trustees act. I know. He has significant resources. Security personnel. Legal infrastructure. I know that. Too. Most women in your position would take the affair and the settlement and leave. Amara met her eyes. Most women in my position don't have an unborn son with a protected inheritance that someone is trying to steal before he's old enough to know it existed. Selena was quiet for a beat. Then she opened her document case and pulled out a yellow legal pad. All right, she said. Tell me what you already have. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Amara's life. She moved through her marriage like an actor who has memorized the blocking but is no longer invested in the performance. She discussed nursery furniture with Si-hwan over Saturday breakfast. She went to prenatal appointments alone because Si-hwan had begun claiming evening conflicts that she no longer bothered to question. She let him rest his hand on her stomach during one of those rare evenings when he sat beside her on the couch, and she said nothing when he told her not to worry about complicated things. She smiled. She nodded. She documented everything. Selena's forensic team was moving through Hae-rin's financial trail with quiet efficiency, pulling records through methods. Amara chose not to examine too closely. Malcolm had sourced a surveillance consultant who tracked the waterfront apartment's visitor log from a rented unit across the street. Every piece of information fed back to Amara through a secure messaging application that auto-deleted threads every 24 hours. She told no one else. Not her mother. Not her closest friends. Not anyone whose concern might create visible ripples in Si-hwan's peripheral vision. The only other person who knew any part of it was Jong-soo. She had gone to him on a Thursday afternoon, driving herself to the older man's house in Medina, sitting across from him in a room full of traditional Korean furniture and framed photographs of a company that had started with 2 cargo vessels and a borrowed shipping dock. Jong-soo was 68 years old and had the particular stillness of a man who had long ago made peace with the fact that his decisions had consequences he would spend his remaining years managing. When she told him what she'd found, he closed his eyes for a long moment. You knew, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just the truth arriving. I knew my son was capable of this, he said carefully. I did not know he had done it. Is there a difference? He opened his eyes and looked at her. He didn't answer. I need to know whose side you're on, Amara said. Not for me. For Nolan. Jong-soo looked at a photograph on the wall. Si-hwan, at maybe 14, standing beside a cargo vessel with his shoulders back and his father's hand resting briefly on his arm. My son, Jong-soo said finally, has become something I did not intend to build. He was quiet for another moment. The trustees will have my full cooperation. That's all I needed, Amara said. She stood. She was 30 weeks pregnant, and her back hurt, and she was very tired. Don't tell him I came here. Of course not. She walked to the door. Amara, Jong-soo's voice behind her was rough at the edges. I am sorry. She paused with her hand on the doorframe and looked back at him. I know, she said. That's not enough, but I know. She left. The night she followed Si-hwan to the waterfront apartment, she almost didn't go. She had everything she needed to bring to the trustees. The wire documentation, the shell company filings, the forensic trail, the recorded phone confirmation Malcolm's contact had pulled from an intercepted exchange. She almost stopped there. But Selena had said it clearly. Direct evidence of intent. A paper trail could be argued. Documents could be explained away by lawyers who charged $400 an hour specifically to explain things away. What the trustees needed, what would make the case airtight, what would make it impossible for Si-hwan to mount a counter-argument that tied things up for years while Taemak found another angle, was Si-hwan himself, in his own voice, confirming what he knew and what he'd agreed to. So when Si-hwan kissed her cheek on a Thursday evening and told her he had an investor dinner, Amara waited 30 minutes, put on flat shoes and a dark coat that didn't quite button over her stomach anymore, and called Malcolm. "I need you to drive," she said. He was quiet for 2 seconds. "You're 32 weeks pregnant." 33. Amara, Malcolm. He picked her up 14 minutes later without another word. The waterfront apartment building had a service corridor running along its north face, parallel to the parking structure. Malcolm had walked the layout twice in the preceding week, because Malcolm was the kind of person who walked layouts in advance. He got Amara through the building's lower level and into position behind a section of wall near the corridor junction that sat adjacent to the apartment's interior mechanical space, close enough that conversation carried clearly through an unsealed ventilation panel, far enough that they were invisible to anyone inside. Amara pressed record on her phone. Si-hwan's voice came through first. Then Hae-rin's. Then a third voice lower, more deliberate, with the unhurried cadence of someone who was accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room he entered. Hwan Taemak. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Samara listened to her husband confirm in his own words that he understood the trust funds were protected, that he understood the transfer would create a technical default position on the terminal guarantee, that he understood Taemak's intention to use that position to seize Rainier Eastport. He said it clearly. He said it without hesitation. He said it because he was in a room where he believed no one was listening. Then Hae-rin said, "Once she's out of the way, none of this matters anymore." And Si-hwan said nothing. His silence lasted 4 seconds. Amara counted them. He didn't tell Hae-rin to stop. He didn't ask what she meant. He made a small sound of acknowledgement and moved on to discussing the transfer's timing. 4 seconds, 12 years of marriage. The contraction hit without warning, a deep, squeezing pressure low in her abdomen that knocked the breath out of her completely. She grabbed Malcolm's arm. He grabbed her back, steady and immediate, one hand at her elbow and one at her back, and she pressed her lips together and breathed through it the way she'd been practicing, short and controlled, while her phone continued recording. Malcolm pointed toward the exit with his eyes. She shook her head. He gave her the look of a man who had lost arguments with her before and knew he was losing this one. The contraction eased. She steadied her breathing. The conversation inside continued. Then her phone hit the wall. It was nothing, a slight shift in her grip, her hand still unsteady from the contraction. The phone's edge tapped against the concrete, a small sound, the kind of thing that would disappear in any other setting. Inside, the conversation stopped. Si-hwan's voice. "Did you hear that?" Malcolm's hand tightened on her arm. They moved. She sent the recording to Selena from the car, her hands shaking slightly, not from fear, she realized, but from the particular physical aftermath of controlled adrenaline in a body already operating under considerable strain. Contraction had passed. Her son was still moving, which the apps all told her was a good sign. "You okay?" Malcolm said without taking his eyes off the road. "No," she said honestly. He nodded. He didn't offer her anything softer than that, which was exactly why she'd called him. Back in the unfinished nursery, she sat on the edge of the glider chair that hadn't been assembled yet and let herself cry for the first time since the whole thing started. Not for the betrayal, not for the marriage. Cried for the man who had sat on that hospital bed after the second miscarriage and pressed his forehead against her hand and shaken apart completely, the way people only shake apart when they don't know anyone is watching. She had been watching. She had understood it then as evidence of something she couldn't name precisely. Not weakness exactly, but the presence of something real beneath the control. She had loved that man. She was no longer certain that man had ever truly existed outside of that one moment, or if he had existed once and been swallowed by everything that came after. It didn't matter anymore. That was the part she was still learning to hold. She pressed her palms flat against her stomach and felt Nolan shift into a slow, rolling movement she'd come to recognize as his sleeping pattern. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm sorry it took this long." 3 days later, she placed the divorce papers on the kitchen table in front of Si-hwan. She asked for nothing from his personal fortune. She raised no public accusation. She did not mention Hae-rin by name. Si-hwan read the papers twice. His jaw tightened. He looked up at her with the particular expression of a man whose pride is constructing a story that makes sense of something he cannot process. "There's someone else," he said. Not a question. A conclusion he had arrived at because the alternative that she had simply decided was not something his understanding of the world had room for. Amara looked at him across 12 years of kitchen mornings and said nothing. He signed. He signed because he believed her silence confirmed the story he was telling himself. He signed because he thought it freed him. He signed because he had never understood that her restraint was not weakness. It had never been weakness, and it was too late for that particular education. That night he went to Hae-rin. Amara took one suitcase and the hospital bag she had packed at 30 weeks and left the penthouse with Malcolm waiting in the lobby below. She did not look back at the building. From the car she sent Selena one message. "The signature is secured. Monday's vote can proceed." Then she put her phone face down in her lap and watched Seattle pass outside the window, all that wet light reflecting off all that gray water, and allowed herself to feel, very briefly, the specific weight of a life that had just changed its shape completely. Her son moved. She put her hand against her ribs. "Almost," she said. "Just a little longer." The suitcase fit in the back of Malcolm's car without any trouble. That was the thing Amara kept noticing on the drive to the serviced apartment in Capitol Hill that Selena had quietly arranged, how little she was taking. 12 years inside that penthouse. 12 years of accumulated objects and photographs, and the particular debris of a life shared with someone. And what she had chosen to carry amounted to one rolling bag and a tote with her hospital documents, her laptop, and a small framed photograph of her parents' backyard in Atlanta, where she had grown up climbing a particular oak tree that no longer existed. She hadn't taken a single photograph of herself and Si-hwan. She wasn't sure what that said about her. She wasn't sure it said anything she hadn't already known. Malcolm carried the bag upstairs without being asked. He checked the apartment's locks, both the main door and the sliding panel on the balcony access hut, while Amara stood in the kitchen, running water she didn't intend to drink. Then he came and stood in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed and looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since they were children. Like he was calculating exactly how much weight she was carrying and whether she was going to let any of it fall. "I'm not going to fall apart," she said without turning around. "I didn't say anything. You were about to." He was quiet for a moment. "I was going to ask if you were hungry." She turned off the tap. "No." "Okay." He didn't move from the doorway. "That contraction tonight." "Braxton Hicks." "You don't know that, Malcolm." "Amara." He said her name the same way she'd said his flat, final, the shorthand of two people who had grown up in the same family and no longer needed volume to make a point. "You are 33 weeks pregnant, and you were crouched against a concrete wall for 17 minutes in this cold. I need you to tell me you're going to call the doctor tomorrow." "I'll call the doctor tomorrow. First thing." "First thing." He held her gaze for another 3 seconds, the way he always did when he was deciding whether to push further or let something rest. Then he nodded once and pushed off the door frame. "I'll be back at 7 with food." "You don't have to." 7, he said. He was already putting his jacket back on. "Lock the balcony." She heard the front door close. Then it was just her, and the sound of rain against the windows in the city, doing what the city did at midnight, existing indifferently, without reference to any particular person's circumstances. She sat down on the edge of the bed without taking her coat off and pressed both palms to her stomach. Nolan moved, a slow, deliberate pressure against her left side that she'd come to think of as his version of checking in. I know, she said, we're okay. She wasn't entirely sure that was true. But she said it anyway, because some things needed to be said in the direction of the future, even when the present had not yet caught up. She did not sleep well. She hadn't slept well in 6 weeks, which was partly the pregnancy and partly the particular insomnia that comes from keeping a secret too large for a normal night's rest. But this night was differentless, the restlessness of concealment, and more the wide-open stillness of a decision already made, already irreversible, waiting now for its own consequences to arrive. She lay on her back, with her hands folded across her stomach, and stared at the ceiling, and let herself think about Si-hwan. Not the version of him she'd been cataloging for 6 weeks. The earlier version. There had been a trip to Jeju Island 7 years into the marriage, just the two of them. A week she had not thought about in a long time, because thinking about it required holding two truths simultaneously, and she had not had the capacity for that until recently. He had been different on that trip. Quieter, less the chairman of anything, more just a man who wanted to sit on a balcony watching the ocean and say very little. She had loved that version of him, with a completeness that embarrassed her slightly, even now in this room, in this life. She wondered when he had decided to stop being that person. She wondered if he had decided, or if it had simply happened the way most losses happen, incrementally, invisibly, so slowly that neither of them had noticed the exact moment the thing they were protecting disappeared. Then she thought about the recording. 4 seconds of silence, when Haerin said, "Once she's out of the way." And she stopped thinking about Jeju Island. Selena called at 8:15 the next morning. "The forensic team finished the secondary trace last night," she said. "I have everything I need for the trustee presentation. The vote is set for Monday, that's 4 days. Yes." Amara was standing at the apartment window with a cup of tea she'd made badly because she hadn't thought to check whether the kitchen was stocked. It was approximately the color and temperature of dishwater. She drank it anyway. "Has Si-hwan done anything since last night?" she asked. His personal security pulled the building's exterior footage from the corridor area. A pause. "They won't find anything useful." Malcolm was thorough. "Si-hwan knows someone was there. He suspects. There's a difference." Selena's voice was measured. "He doesn't know it was you, his current working theory. This is coming from a source inside Bake Meridian's administrative office. That it was a Tamok operative running counter-surveillance." Amara felt something shift in her chest. A grim, involuntary appreciation for the irony. He thinks Tamok is watching him, which means he's nervous about Tamok, which means he may push the transfer timeline up. How far up? That's the question. Selena was quiet for a moment. "I've asked the forensic accountant to put a monitoring flag on the transfer vehicle. If anyone initiates a new movement instruction, we'll know within the hour. And the trustees? All 5 independent members are confirmed for Monday. Jong-soo will be present in person." Another pause, shorter this time. "He called me this morning. He wanted me to tell you that he will not interfere with the proceedings." Amara looked out at the street below. A woman was walking a dog. A delivery driver was double parked. The city was going about its Friday in complete ignorance of anything that was happening inside it. "Did he sound like he meant it?" Amara asked. Selena considered this. "He sounded like a man who has run out of alternatives." "That's almost the same thing." "Almost," Selena agreed. Malcolm arrived at 7 with food, as promised Korean fried chicken from a place on Pine Street that had been Amara's consistent craving for the past 6 weeks, a fact he had apparently memorized without being told to. He set it on the kitchen table and sat across from her, and did not speak while she ate, which was another thing she valued about him, his ability to understand when presence was more useful than conversation. She was halfway through when her phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. She looked at it. The number was blocked. The message was 3 words. "He knows something." She turned the phone around so Malcolm could see it. He read it. His expression didn't change. "Who sent it?" "I don't know." She looked at it again. "Someone inside Bake Meridian. Or close to it. Could be a play. Si-hwan trying to flush out who's been watching. Could be." She set the phone face down. "Or someone is warning us." Malcolm pulled the phone back and looked at the message a second time. I'll run the number. It's blocked. Doesn't mean I can't find it. He pocketed his own phone. Eat. She ate, but the message sat in the back of her mind for the rest of the evening, with the particular weight of things that are true but cannot yet be proven. The call from Si-hwan came at 9:43 Friday night. Amara was in bed when the phone rang, not sleeping. She had not been sleeping, and she stared at his name on the screen for 4 full rings before she answered. Si-hwan, where are you? Not a question, the flat declarative version that he used when he was controlling something. I'm at a friend's. Which friend? That's not your information anymore. A silence. She could hear him breathing. She'd been listening to that man breathe for 12 years, and she knew every register of it. She knew the controlled breathing of a man in a meeting, the slow rhythm of him asleep, and this, the tight, constricted sound of someone pressing down very hard on something they don't want to say. The papers were filed this morning, he said finally. I know, I filed them. The attorney I spoke with said the processing timeline is 60 days. Standard timeline, yes. I want to discuss the nursery furniture. She blinked. Of all the things she had anticipated Mstusen saying, that was not among them. I'm sorry, the nursery. The delivery is scheduled for the 15th. I assumed you would want to be present. Amara sat up slowly, one hand braced against the mattress, and tried to identify what he was doing. It wasn't concern or not primarily. It was positioning. He was establishing normality. If anyone was watching or listening, this was a man who had signed divorce papers and was still calmly discussing nursery furniture. A reasonable man, a cooperative man, a man who had nothing to hide. I'll handle the delivery, she said. I'll let the building manager know. I'll handle it, Si-hwan. Another silence. Longer this time. Are you healthy? He said. The question landed in the particular way that some questions do, with just enough sincerity embedded in them to make the performance unreadable. She genuinely could not tell whether he was asking because he wanted to know or because he wanted to be documented as the kind of man who asked. I'm fine, she said. Nolan's fine. Good. He stopped. Then I didn't expect you to do this now. This close. I know. If there's no one, Si-hwan. She kept her voice even. I've been alone in this marriage for longer than you think. The silence after that was the longest one yet. Get some rest, he said finally. And then he was gone. Amara sat in the dark with the phone in her lap for a while. The truth was, she had not been expecting that call to rattle her. She had run the conversation in her head in advance, mapped the possible directions, prepared herself. But something in the last 10 seconds of it had gotten through anyway. Not what he'd said, but the way he'd said it. The tiny fault line in the controlled voice when he told her to rest. Like something in him still functioned the way it used to, before all the rest of it. Pressed her palm against her ribs. Nolan moved. I know, she said. Stop giving him credit. She wasn't sure her son was the one she was talking to. Saturday brought information she had not been looking for. Malcolm sent it at 11 in the morning, a screenshot from a financial monitoring alert Selena's team had set on the transfer vehicle. The $8 million instruction had been modified. The transfer date had been moved forward, from the following Wednesday to Sunday's night. Amara called Selena before she had finished reading the message. I see it, Selena said. She was already talking faster than her usual measured pace. He's accelerating, which means either he's found out about the trustee meeting or he's responding to the surveillance breach and trying to complete the transaction before any opposition can form. Can the trustees move the vote up? I'm calling them now. 2 of the 5 are traveling. I can get 3 on a secure call by tomorrow afternoon, but she stopped. 3 isn't enough for a binding suspension of access. How many do you need? 4 of 5 for a protective freeze on asset movements. 5 of 5 for full removal. Who's unavailable? Park Sung-woo is in Tokyo. He doesn't land until Monday morning. Stood at the apartment window, watching the street below in the particular way she'd been watching it all weekend. Not looking for anything specific, just keeping the habit of attention. Can Park vote remotely? His charter provision is ambiguous on remote participation for emergency sessions. A keyboard sound in the background. I have someone looking at the language now. Look faster. I am. Selena's voice tightened slightly, the closest she ever came to showing stress. Amara, if he moves that money Sunday night, we lose the terminal. The freeze won't matter afterward. The transaction will have already processed. Reversing it through the courts takes months. The terminal default would be engineered within the week. Amara thought about 1,812 people going to work Monday morning, not knowing. What do we need, she said, to stop it before Sunday night? Selena was quiet for 2 seconds. We need a fifth trustee signature on an emergency injunction against asset movement. Or we need Si-hwan to not have the ability to authorize the transfer. He uses a master authentication key. Yes, a physical hardware token. Kept in his private safe at the penthouse. Amara thought about the penthouse. Her former penthouse. The safe she knew the combination to, because Si-hwan had never changed it after she'd learned it 5 years ago, and had apparently forgotten that she had. I can get it, she said. Amara, I still have building access. My name is still on the security panel until the attorneys process the change. I can get in, get the key, and be out in 20 minutes. If he's there, he won't be. He'll be with Hayrin tonight. He was with her every Saturday night for the past 4 months. She paused. I have the logs. Selena's silence lasted long enough that Amara could feel the calculation happening on the other end. I need to be clear, Selena said finally. If anything goes wrong, if he's there, if security stops you, if anyone can later argue that you removed the token without authorization, it compromises everything. The trustee's the case, your position as Nolan's representative. I know, this is a significant risk. Selena, Amara's voice was quiet and very flat. He moved the timeline to destroy 1,800 families faster. I'm not going to stand here and protect my legal position while he does it. A long beat. I'll have the emergency injunction paperwork drafted and ready to file the moment the key is secure, Selena said. You'll have a 2-hour window before his security system generates an internal access log that gets reviewed by his operations team. That's enough. Take Malcolm. I was already going to. Malcolm listened to the plan with his arms crossed, and his face doing the thing it did when he was moving past objection and into execution. 2 things, he said. Tell me. 1, we go at midnight, not tonight. His Saturday schedule runs late, and I want confirmed visual on him leaving Eastlake before we go anywhere near that building. He held up a second finger. 2, you wait in the car. Malcolm, you are 33 weeks pregnant, and you were having contractions 48 hours ago. You give me the safe combination. I go in. I get the key. I'm back in 12 minutes. He looked at her steadily. This is not a negotiation. This is the part where you let me help you. She wanted to argue. She understood the argument well enough to know it would lose. 12 minutes, she said. 10 if the elevator's fast. They confirmed visual on Si-hwan, leaving the Eastlake building at 10:58. Malcolm's contact sent the timestamp with a photograph taken from across the street. They drove to the penthouse building at 11:45, and Malcolm went up alone, while Amara sat in the front seats with the engine running, and her phone in her hand, and her son pressing steadily against her ribs like he was trying to remind her to breathe. Malcolm was back in 11 minutes. He got in, handed her a small black hardware token no larger than a thumb drive, and pulled out of the parking structure without speaking. Okay? She said, fine. He checked his mirrors twice. Nobody saw me. She turned the token over in her hand. It was lighter than she'd expected. Unremarkable. The kind of object that looked like nothing and contained everything. She sent Selena a single-word message. Secured. The response from Selena came at 12:31. There's a problem. Amara had been almost asleep when the message arrived. She sat up and read it, and then called instead of texting back. Tell me, she said. The injunction requires wet signatures from 4 trustees. Selena's voice was controlled but stripped of its usual pacing. The court won't accept remote authorization on an emergency filing of this scale without physical signatures. I have 3 trustees in Seattle. Park is still in Tokyo. And she paused. Amara, Jongsu has not signed. He said he would cooperate. He said he would not interfere. There's a legal distinction. A silence that felt like the kind that precedes something worse. He called me an hour ago. He said he needs to speak with Si-hwan first. The room was very quiet. He's protecting him, Amara said. I don't know that. He may genuinely believe he can reason with his son before Monday. He cannot reason with Si-hwan. Amara was already out of bed, moving to the window, her free hand pressed against her stomach. He has never been able to reason with Si-hwan. That is how we got here. I know, if Jong-soo doesn't sign by Sunday morning, the injunction doesn't file. The transfer goes through Sunday night. The terminal defaults by Wednesday. She stopped. Selena. I know. Selena's voice was even in tight at the same time. I'm driving to Jong-soo's house right now. It's past midnight. I'm aware. I'm coming with you. Amara, you need to I'm coming, she said. Pick me up. Jong-soo answered the door in a robe, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either. He looked at Amara in the hallways, and then at Selena, and then back at Amara, and something moved across his face that was not quite guilt and not quite grief, but lived somewhere in the narrow territory between them. Come in, he said. The house was quiet and lit only by the kitchen lights and one lamp in the front room. Amara sat across from him in the same chair she'd sat in before and looked at this man. This 68-year-old man who had built something significant and raised a son who had learned to use that significance as a weapon, and waited. He is still my son, Jong-soo said. He said it to the floor. I know that, Amara said. What you're asking me to sign will destroy him. What he chose to do will destroy him. I am asking you to protect 1,800 workers and your grandson's inheritance. She kept her voice level. Not cold, she wasn't trying for cold, just honest. Jong-soo Si-hwan made this choice. He made it knowing the trust was protected. He made it knowing the terminal would collapse. He made it knowing those families would lose their jobs. She paused. You did not do those things. Signing that injunction doesn't make you responsible for his choices. It makes you responsible for not letting them stand. Jong-soo was quiet for a long time. The kitchen clock ticked. Amara's son shifted inside her, one long, slow roll that she felt all the way up into her ribs. Jong-soo looked at her stomach. He would have been a good father, the old man said. Once, I think he could have been. He can still be Nolan's father, Amara said. Part is separate. But it requires him to live with what he's done. Which means it has to come out. Jong-soo looked up at her. His eyes were the eyes of a man who was tired, in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Give me the paper, he said. Selena had it ready. He signed it at 12:57 in the morning, at his kitchen table, under the one lamp that was still lit, while Amara watched and felt something that was not relief. It was too tight and too complicated to be relief, but was at least the sensation of one door closing firmly enough that it would not open again. She thanked him. He nodded once and did not stand when they left. In Selena's car, pulling out of the dark residential street toward the city, Amara pressed the back of her head against the headrest and closed her eyes and breathed. The injunction files at 9 a.m., Selena said. And the trustees meet Monday. A pause. We stop the transfer. For now. Selena glanced at her. You don't sound relieved. I have Si-hwan's authentication key in my bag, Amara said. Jong-soo just signed paperwork that will end his son's control of everything he built. And in 4 days I'm going to walk into a boardroom and play a recording of my husband explaining how to steal from his own child's future. She opened her eyes and looked at the city moving past the window. There's nothing about any of this that feels like relief, she said. Selena didn't answer that. She just drove. And the injunction filed at 9:03 Sunday morning, and the asset transfer instruction hit a federal hold before noon. And Si-hwan spent Sunday evening at Hae-rin's apartment, not yet knowing that the mechanism he had trusted to complete everything was already frozen, already documented, already waiting for him on the other side of a Monday morning he could not yet see. Amara spent Sunday night in the Capitol Hill apartment, unable to sleep, one hand on her stomach, listening to the city outside the window, thinking about a man she had loved for 12 years, and the 4 seconds of silence that had finally told her everything she needed to know. Monday was coming, and she was ready. Monday arrived the way serious things always do, without announcement, without the courtesy of feeling significant until you were already inside it. Amara was dressed by 6:15, dark blue, flat shoes. Her hair pulled back in the way she wore it when she needed to feel like herself, rather than like anyone's wife or anyone's victim or anyone's unexpected problem. She stood in the Capitol Hill apartment's small bathroom mirror and looked at her own face for a long moment, the tiredness around her eyes, a particular set of her jaw that her mother had always called her courthouse face, the slight swell of her stomach, visible even under the structured cut of the maternity dress. 33 weeks and 4 days. She had a boardroom to walk into. She picked up her bag, checked her phone, nothing from Selena yet, which meant nothing had gone wrong overnight, and called Malcolm. "I'm ready," she said. "Car's downstairs," he said. "Eat something first." "I'm not hungry." "I didn't ask if you were hungry." She ate half a piece of toast, standing over the kitchen sink. Then she went downstairs. Selena was already inside the Bake Meridian building when they arrived. She had come early to coordinate with the building's independent security contractor, a firm that had been quietly retained by the trustees 3 days prior, the internal security team that answered directly to Si-hwan for the duration of the morning's proceedings. It had been done through a provision in the trust's operational charter that allowed trustees to assume temporary security authority during investigations involving executive misconduct. Si-hwan didn't know about that provision. Most people didn't. It was the kind of language that gets buried in founding documents by careful attorneys who hope it will never be needed. Marcus Havel was already in the boardroom when Amara arrived. He was Bake Meridian's operations chief, 51 years old, 22 years with the company, a man whose entire professional identity was built around keeping the machinery running regardless of who was nominally in charge. He had received a sealed briefing from the independent trustees the previous Thursday. He had not contacted Si-hwan. He had not contacted anyone. He stood when Amara walked in. "Mrs. Beck?" he said. "Ms. Lennox," she said, not unkindly, just clearly. "How are the terminal operations this morning?" "Normal," he said. "Everything's running." He held her gaze for a moment with the expression of a man who understood more than he'd been officially told. "I made sure of it. Thank you." She sat down 2 seats from the head of the table. The head of the table was empty. Si-hwan's chair had been removed. He arrived at 8:52. Amara heard his voice in the corridor before the doors opened, the particular resonance of a man who had spent decades walking into rooms and having them rearrange themselves around him. He was mid-sentence with someone on his phone, something about a logistics contract. The easy authority of a man who believed this morning was like every other morning. The doors opened. He stopped. Jong-soo was seated at the head of the table. Selena sat to his right with a sealed document case in front of her. The 5 independent trustees appeared on secure monitors mounted along the far wall, each in their own frame, each present and attentive. Marcus sat along the side wall with a tablet and the expression of someone who had been told to observe and intended to do exactly that. Si-hwan looked at the monitors. He looked at Selena. He looked at his father. His face did not break. That was the thing about Si-hwan, his face almost never broke. He had trained it too well, over too many years of rooms, where showing reaction was the same as showing weakness. But his hand, where it gripped the doorframe, went white at the knuckles. "What is this?" he said. Jong-soo did not answer immediately. He looked at his son with the face of a man who has made a decision that cost him something he cannot recover. Selena spoke. "Please come in and close the door, Si-hwan." He came in. He did not close the door immediately, a small instinctive assertion of control, making the room wait for him. Then he closed it. He looked around for his chair. "You'll be seated along the side," Selena said. "This is a trustee proceeding." Seating reflects standing. His jaw tightened. He sat. Selena opened the document case. She was precise and she was merciless, and she did it without raising her voice once. The Yoon Consulting Group registration. The Delaware filing date. The 14 months of wire transfers, totaling just over 2.3 million from a personal account, structured to appear as legitimate consulting fees. The waterfront apartment lease. The Vancouver hotel. The Tanzanite bracelet. The 3 personal credit cards that had not appeared on any joint financials disclosure. Si-hwan sat with his hands flat on the table in front of him and said nothing. Selina moved to the trust documents. The $8 million transfer instruction. The routing through Yoon Consulting Group's secondaries account. The two holding entities. The investment vehicle registered to Kwan Tae-mok. Sound like she placed each document on the table as she named it, building a visible architecture of paper that grew across the surface in front of Si-hwan like something he could not look away from. The trust's protective charter is explicit, Selina said. Assets classified as generational holdings cannot be redirected toward private debt instruments or transferred to entity outside trustee-approved parameters without unanimous trustee authorization. There was no such authorization. There was no trustee consultation. The transfer instruction was generated unilaterally using the chairman's authorization credentials. Si-hwan finally spoke. This is an internal administrative matter. Can be resolved through. It is not administrative, Jong-soo said. The room went very quiet. Si-hwan looked at his father. Jong-soo did not look away. It is theft. From your son's inheritance. You will not call it administrative in this room. The silence after that had weight to it. Selina reached into the document case and removed a small digital playback device. She set it in the center of the table. She pressed play. The recording ran for 11 minutes and 7 seconds. Si-hwan's voice filled the room. Clear, unhurried, entirely recognizable. Confirming the trust funds were protected. Confirming the default mechanism. Confirming his understanding of Tae-mok's intended use of the terminal collapse. And then Hae-rin's voice. Once she's out of the way, none of this will matter. And 4 seconds of silence. And Si-hwan's voice again, asking about the transfer timeline. When the recording ended, the boardroom was so quiet that Amara could hear the ventilation system above the ceiling tiles. Si-hwan turned his head slowly and looked at the side of the room where Amara had not yet appeared. As if he already knew, he tried to recover. She had known he would. That recording is inadmissible, he said. His voice was controlled. It was obtained without consent in a private residence. Any attorney in... This is a trustee proceeding, Selina said. Not a criminal court. The admissibility standards that govern private trust documentation are not equivalent to criminal evidentiary rules. She folded her hands. The trustees have reviewed this recording, the supporting documentation, and the forensic accounting analysis. They've had 72 hours to examine the material. Then they've examined selectively edited material compiled by someone with a personal interest in destroying me. Si-hwan. One of the monitors spoke Park Sung-woo, calling in from Tokyo, his voice precise through the secure connection. I have reviewed every page of this file, including the wire transfer confirmation you personally authenticated on the 14th, including the internal message thread that shows you queried the trust's protective status 3 days before initiating the transfer instruction. A pause. You knew the funds were protected. You queried the system to confirm it, and you proceeded anyway. The color left Si-hwan's face. Not dramatically. Just a slow withdrawal, like light leaving a room. He had forgotten about that query. Or he had believed no one would find it. Selina said Si-hwan. Effective immediately, the independent trustees are invoking Section 14C of the Legacy Trust Charter. Your authorization credentials for all protected asset movements are suspended. Your operational signatory status at Bake Meridian Holdings is suspended pending full trustee review. The $8 million transfer instruction has been frozen by federal injunction since Sunday morning. He stood up. He stopped. He looked at his father. You did this. Jong-soo met his son's eyes and did not flinch. You did this. I built this company. I built everything this trust protects. Every dollar in that fund exists because of decisions I made. And every worker at Rainier Eastport, Jong-soo said, exists because your grandfather made a promise that this family would not abandon the people who depended on us. You were prepared to break that promise for a woman and a rivalry you could not manage without cheating. His voice cracked at the edge. Not much, just the one small fracture of a man who had not allowed himself to feel this in the room and was now failing to prevent it. I am ashamed. Si-hwan's mouth opened, then closed. Then he turned toward the boardroom doors with the specific intention of a man who has decided to end a proceeding by walking out of it. The doors did not open. He tried the handle. Behind him, Si-hwan said quietly, Si-hwan, security has temporarily restricted building egress for the duration of the proceeding. It's a standard trustee protocol under Section 9 of the Operational Charter. He turned back around. His eyes moved to Marcus. Override it. Marcus looked at him steadily. I can't do that, sir. I don't have authority over trustee security protocol. You have building authority. Not during a Section 9 proceeding. Marcus held his gaze without hostility, without apology, with the particular patience of a man who has decided which side of a line he is standing on. I'm sorry. Si-hwan stood in the center of the boardroom and gave an order to his head of operations, and his head of security, and his own father, and nobody moved. The former Mafia Boss, the man who had run the Pacific Coast Korean network with absolute authority for 11 years, the man whose decisions had never once failed to generate immediate compliance, gave an order. And nobody moved. Amara watched it from the back of the room. Splitting. She had entered through the secondary access while the recording played, slipping through the door that connected to the administrative corridor, the door she had used dozens of times over 12 years of attending board dinners and charity events in this building. She stood near the wall with her hands loose at her sides and her face quiet. Si-hwan saw her. He looked at her for a long time. She looked back. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not humiliation, though both of those were there. It was recognition. The specific, arriving recognition of a man who is understanding, in real time, that the person he had systematically underestimated was the same person who had just dismantled everything. You, she said. Selena announced the procedural outcome efficiently and without drama. Marcus would assume operational control of Bake Meridian Holdings under trustee oversight effective immediately. Amaris would serve as temporary representative of Nolan's beneficiary interests, pending the appointment of a permanent independent guardian for the trust. Jongsu's role would be purely advisory, with no transactional authority. Si-hwan's criminal exposure would be referred to federal authorities. Si-hwan listened to all of this with his hands at his sides, and his face doing the controlled, shuttered thing it did when he was deciding whether to fight or wait. He chose to speak. She's taking my empire, he said. To the room, to the monitors, to no one specific. Amara responded before Selena could. I declined the chairman's chair before this meeting started, she said. She looked at her husband, her former husband, across the length of the table that had once been his. I took nothing that belonged to you. The divorce happened because you destroyed our marriage. The trustees removed you because you stole protected money. Those are different decisions, with different consequences. I didn't combine them. You did. Si-hwan stared at her. The transfer was supposed to benefit Nolan. Eventually, he said. Came out quieter than she expected. Almost private. Don't, she said. The Tamok arrangement was don't. Her voice didn't rise. It just got very flat. Don't explain it to me, like I'm the one who needs to understand something. I understand everything. That's the problem. He stopped. Selena said, We'll need to address the matter of the physical authentication key. Amara reached into her bag and set the black hardware token on the table. Si-hwan looked at it. Then he looked at her, and she watched him calculate exactly what that meant, that she'd been in the penthouse, that she'd taken it before Sunday night, that the transfer he'd been relying on had been frozen not only by the injunction, but by the physical removal of his authorization mechanism. She had come at him from every direction. He hadn't seen any of them. The transfer would have gone through, he said slowly. Not accusing, just working it out. Sunday night, she said. Yes, you were already in the building before Sunday. Saturday night, you were in Eastlake. He closed his eyes for 2 seconds. That was when the door opened. Not the main doors, the secondary access. The door Amara had come through. Hae-rin walked in. Later, Amara would try to reconstruct how it had happened, how Hae-rin had known, who had told her, to sound splitting. Sound, whether she had simply followed the pattern of the morning and arrived at and found some gap in the trustee security protocol that a woman who was not technically a party to any proceeding could slip through. She would not get a fully satisfying answer to any of those questions. What she saw was this: Hae-rin, in a gray wool coat, with her hair pulled back and her face composed in the way of someone who has made a decision and arrived to execute it. She looked at the room, she looked at the table, she looked at the authentication token, sitting in the center of it. And then she moved toward the table. She was fast. Faster than anyone in the room anticipated, because nobody had been anticipating her at all. She covered the distance between the door and the table in 5 steps, and on the 5th step she picked up the authentication token and closed her hand around it. Selena said, "Stop." Marcus was already on his feet. Si-hwan said her name, Hey-rin. She turned to look at him, and the look on her face was not the look of a woman who had come to help. It was the look of a woman who had understood something several days ago that she had only now arrived to act on. "You signed the divorce papers," she said to him, "without telling me." "Hey-rin, I found out from your attorney's assistant." "Not from you." She held the token in her closed fist. "You were going to let them take everything, and then tell me it was over." "That's not what was happening, Moing. I've been handling Tamok's communications for 6 months," she said. "Do you understand what that means? I know everything about this arrangement. And you were going to let them freeze it and disappear and leave me holding whatever he decides to do about the fact that his plan just failed." The room had gone completely still. Si-hwan looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Not remorse, not exactly. More like the specific arriving horror of a man who is realizing that the elements of a situation he believed he controlled have been in motion independently of him for longer than he knew. "Give me the key," Selena said. Her voice was steady. "Hey-rin, the transfer is frozen by federal injunction. The key can't authorize anything tonight. Taking it accomplishes nothing." "It accomplishes something for Tamok," Hey-rin said. The room shifted. Marcus moved toward her from the left. She stepped back, not panicked, but deliberate, the movement of someone who had already mapped the room before entering it. "If I bring him this," she said, "there's a secondary authentication pathway. It requires the physical token plus a biometric override. The biometric is his." She looked at Si-hwan. He had it set up 8 months ago. Before the injunction, before any of this, her voice did not shake. "He built a bypass, in case you tried to freeze him out." Selena turned to look at Si-hwan. Si-hwan said nothing. "Is that true?" Selena said. The silence lasted 4 seconds. 5. Si-hwan, Jong-soo said. His voice was a different thing now, not the authority of the boardroom, not the rehearsed steadiness of a man making a difficult decision. It was the voice of a father who is standing at the absolute outer edge of what he can hold. "Is there a secondary pathway?" "It was a contingency," Si-hwan said. Quietly, "It was built before any of this. It was never meant to." "Can Tamok use it?" Selena said. Si-hwan's jaw worked. "Can he use it?" she said again. "Yes." The word came out with the flatness of something he had run out of energy to contain. "If he has the physical token and accesses it, before the injunction penetrates the secondary system architecture." "There's a window." He paused. 4 hours. Maybe 5. Hey-rin was already at the secondary door. Marcus reached it before her. He was bigger and faster and had been on his feet longer. He put his hand against the door and looked at her. She looked back, and then she did something nobody in that room expected. She looked directly at Si-hwan and said, "Tell him to move." Si-hwan looked at her, at the woman he had been with for 14 months, the woman who had sent his pregnant wife a dress, 2 sizes too small, at the woman whose consulting company he had used as a pipeline for $8 million of stolen trust money. He said nothing. "Tell him to move," she said again. Her voice cracked at the last word, the first crack in the composure, the first sign that the decision she'd made was costing her something she hadn't fully anticipated. "Si-hwan, after everything. Tell him to move." Si-hwan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked away. Hey-rin understood what that meant. She moved fast, not toward the door, but sideways, toward the window bank, and her hand went into her coat pocket and came out with a phone. Before Marcus could close the distance, she had the phone to her ear. 2 words, in Korean. Then she ended the call and threw the phone under the table. Marcus restrained her a second later. She didn't fight him. She just stood with her hands at her sides, and her chin up, and her face doing something complicated that had stopped being readable. Selena was already calling someone. Amara heard her say federal contact, and then authentication bypass, and then the room's sound became a kind of organized chaos monitors, showing trustees leaning forward, Marcus speaking into his own phone, Jong-soo sitting very still with his hands on the table and his eyes on nothing. Amara stood at the wall where she'd been standing since she walked in. She looked at Si-hwan. He was looking at the token, still in Haeren's hand, still not retrieved. Called Taemak, Amara said. Yes, he's moving. Probably. Can the injunction reach the secondary system? Before he does? Si-hwan was quiet for a moment. The secondary system runs on independent infrastructure. It was designed specifically to operate outside the primary network. He paused. It takes the court order longer to reach it. How much longer? He met her eyes. Enough. The word sat between them in the air. Question she needed to ask. Is there another way to disable it? Si-hwan looked at her steadily. He looked the way he'd looked that night in Jeju, not like the chairman of anything, just like a man standing on the far side of a decision he had to live with. The master transaction archive, he said. There's a legacy authentication layer beneath the customs facility on Harbor Island. Original tech infrastructure from the company's first decade. The secondary system uses it as its root authorization node. He paused. If I release the full archive, it broadcasts a termination signal to all derivative authentication pathways, including the bypass. Release it how? Remote command. My biometric. It requires me to fully authenticate as the archive's originating administrator. Amara waited. The archive contains my original transfer instructions, Si-hwan said. The ones that started all of this. The ones that prove intent. He looked at her directly. Releasing it destroys the bypass and saves the terminal. It also proves my guilt completely and eliminates any remaining legal ambiguity about what I did. Amara heard Selena behind her speaking urgently to someone. She heard Marcus still on the phone. She heard the building, doing what buildings do, existing, humming, indifferent to the specific weight of what was happening inside it. She heard her son move, one long, slow shift beneath her ribs. She looked at Si-hwan and she said, then release it. He looked at her for a long moment with a face she could not entirely read. If I do this, he said, it changes nothing between us. It was not quite a question. She answered it without cruelty, which was harder than answering it with cruelty would have been. No, she said, it will only determine who finally pays for your choices. Si-hwan held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he reached across the table, picked up Marcus's tablet, and began entering his biometric credentials for the last time as the man who controlled everything. Haeren watched him from across the room with Marcus's hand on her arm, and her face doing something that had moved entirely past readable into the territory of a person who has understood, too late, that the man she had aligned herself with had never once chosen her when it counted. The archive release took 40 seconds to authenticate. At the end of those 40 seconds, Si-hwan set down the tablet. He looked up, not at Selena, not at the trustees, not at his father. He looked at Amara. And what was on his face then was not guilt and not grief and not the performance of either. It was something rawer than any of those, the particular expression of a man who has just done the only correct thing available to him and understands completely that it is not enough and never will be, and that he will spend whatever comes next, learning to live inside that knowledge. Amara looked back at him. Then her phone buzzed. The message was from an unknown number, and it was 2 words long. And it told her that Taemak was not waiting for the bypass to complete. He was already moving on the terminal, physically, with private security personnel, attempting a direct operational seizure that had nothing to do with digital authentication and everything to do with a man who had decided that if the financial mechanism had failed, force would suffice. 1,812 people were going to work at Rainier Eastport in 6 hours. And the man who intended to take it from them had just changed his plan. The message sat on Amara's screen for 3 seconds before she showed it to Selena. Selena read it. Her face did not change, but her hand went immediately to her own phone. Who sent this? Selena said. I don't know. Is it credible? Amara looked at Si-hwan across the room. Si, if Taemok decided the financial pathway was compromised, would he move on the terminal directly? Si-hwan had been standing very still since he'd set down the tablet. He looked at her now, with the particular attention of a man who has stopped managing his own situation and started actually thinking. He has a private logistics security firm, Si-hwan said. Registered in Vancouver. He's used them before for disputed asset situations. He paused. If he believes the authentication window is closing, yes. He would move to establish physical presence at the terminal before dawn. A body at the gate changes the legal calculus even after a financial mechanism fails. Physical presence meaning what? Marcus said from across the room. Meaning his people on the ground before the terminal opens. Meaning paperwork filed in a Vancouver jurisdiction claiming operational authority under the disputed debt instrument. Meaning the terminal's own security is faced with armed private contractors and a stack of legal filings at 5 in the morning when there's no judge awake to call. Marcus was already on his phone. Selena said, I need the federal contact. Now. She was walking toward the corner of the room with the phone pressed to her ear before she finished the sentence. Amara stood in the center of the boardroom and did the math. Rainier Eastport's morning shift started at 6. It was currently 4:47. Taemok's people were moving now. They had a window of approximately 70 minutes to establish presence before the first workers arrived. Before there were witnesses, before there were union representatives, before there was anyone standing at that gate who wasn't already on Taemok's payroll. She called Malcolm. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either. I'm in the lobby, he said. I've been here since 3. Of course you have. She was already moving toward the door. I need you to drive. Where? Harbor Island. A beat. Amara. Malcolm. You are 33 weeks pregnant and it is 5 in the morning and I am aware of what I am and what time it is. She was through the boardroom door and into the corridor, moving as fast as flat shoes and a 33-week pregnancy allowed. I need eyes on that terminal before Taemok's people get there. I need to know what we're dealing with before the federal team arrives. And I need someone who will drive me there without spending 6 minutes telling me why I shouldn't go. 3 seconds of silence lobby, Malcolm said. Hurry up. Si-hwan caught her at the elevator. She heard him behind her and turned. He was still in his suit from the boardroom, slightly disheveled at the collar. The first time she had seen him look physically disordered in 12 years of marriage. He stopped 3 feet away and looked at her with the expression of a man who understands he has forfeited the right to most things and is attempting to determine what remains. Let me come, he said. No. I know Taemok. I know how his security team operates. I know which of his people will back down when pushed and which ones won't, and I know what he needs to make this work legally. You need that information. Tell me now. It's not that simple. It's situational. It depends on what he sent, what documentation he's carrying, what story he's decided to tell the terminal's security supervisor. He held her gaze. I should be there. Amara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the 4 seconds of silence on the recording. She thought about the authentication token in Haerin's hand and the tablet Si-hwan had picked up and the 40 seconds it had taken him to do the only right thing left available. You ride with Marcus, she said. You do not approach Taemok directly. You do not make any unilateral decisions. You tell Marcus what you know and Marcus relays it to me. Those are the terms. Agreed. If you deviate from those terms once. I won't. She held his eyes 1 more second. Then she turned and got in the elevator. Harbor Island sat 2 miles southwest of downtown Seattle, accessible to a single bridge that fed into a grid of industrial roads and shipping infrastructure that operated on its own timeline, early arrivals, long shifts, the particular culture of people who moved cargo for a living and didn't traffic much in the abstractions that animated the rest of the city. Malcolm drove fast and quiet, the way he drove when the situation had been assessed and the response had decided, and talking about it further would only dilute the focus. Amara sat in the passenger seat with her phone in her lap, tracking 2 incoming calls simultaneously, Selena coordinating with the federal contact, and a terminal security supervisor named Raymond Chu, who had been reached at his home number by Marcus's office and was currently driving in from Renton in a state of controlled alarm. "Raymond," she said when he picked up. "This is Amara Lennox. I represent the Bake Legacy Trust's beneficiary interests. I need you to tell me exactly who is at your terminal right now." Raymond's voice came through with the particular quality of a man who is driving fast and trying to think faster. "I got a call 20 minutes ago from my overseas supervisor. There's a vehicle at the east gate. Private contractor plates. 3 men visible. They're carrying documentation, claiming a creditor authority, filing under a Vancouver commercial court order. How many of your people are on site?" 4 overnight security. None of them armed. "Tell your overnight supervisor to lock the east gate. Do not engage. Do not review any documentation presented by those contractors, and wait for further instruction." She paused. "Tell him that the filing they're presenting is under active federal challenge, and reviewing it constitutes accepting its legitimacy." Those are the exact words. Active federal challenge. "He's going to ask me, tell him those words." "Exactly." "Then call me back." She ended the call. Malcolm was already on the bridge. Below them, the black water of the industrial harbor moved without urgency. "How far?" she said. 4 minutes. Her phone buzzed. Text from Selena, federal team en route. ETA 22 minutes. Hold the gate. 22 minutes. She's looked at the clock on Malcolm's dashboard. 5:11. The east gate of Rainier Eastport was lit by 2 overhead floods that turned the surrounding pavement a hard industrial yellow. When Malcolm pulled up, Amara could see immediately what they were dealing with. A black SUV parked at an angle across the approach lane, 3 men in dark tactical gear standing outside it. A sound like green wood splitting, and 4 of Raymond Chu's overnight security personnel standing on the other side of the gate in the particular posture of people who are outgunned and know it, and are trying not to show it. The man at the center of Tamok's group was holding a document case and talking with the measured patience of someone who has done this before, who understands that the goal is not force, but paperwork, presence, the manufactured appearance of legal legitimacy that creates enough confusion to accomplish the objective, before anyone with real authority can arrive to clarify things. Malcolm stopped the car 50 yards back. "Stay here," he said. "Malcolm!" I'm not arguing this one. He was already toward the gate with the unhurried, ground-eating stride of a man who has spent years learning how to cover distance without appearing to hurry. Amara watched him go. She pressed her palm against her stomach and felt Nolan moving in slow, regular pulses asleep, she thought, or close enough to it that the distinction didn't matter. She got out of the car. Her back hurt. Her feet were swollen enough that she could feel it in her shoes. The night air hit her face cold and sharp, and smelling of salt water and diesel, and the particular industrial smell of a working port. She walked toward the gate. Malcolm saw her coming. His expression communicated very clearly what he thought of her decision. He did not stop walking. The man with the document case noticed them when they were 20 feet out. He turned. He looked at Amara, at the dark coat, the visible pregnancy, the flat shoes, the face that was very awake for 5 in the morning, and something moved behind his eyes that was not quite calculation and not quite surprise. "This is private contractor business," he said. His accent had a Vancouver edge to it. "Please return to your vehicle. I represent the beneficiary interests of the Bake Legacy Trust," Amara said. She stopped at 10 feet and looked at him directly. "A sound like green wood splitting, the dead instrument you're claiming authority under, is currently under active federal challenge, filed in the Western District of Washington at 9:03 yesterday morning. Any operational authority it purports to convey is legally suspended pending resolution." She paused. "You could stand here and present those documents to my terminal security team, and they will continue to decline to review them. Or you can call whoever gave you this assignment and tell them the window closed." The man looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his phone. Then he looked at the gate. Raymond Chu's overnight supervisor had not moved. Neither had the 3 men behind him. "We have a court order," the contractor said. "You have a Vancouver filing on a disputed instrument," Amara said, "in a Washington terminal, with a federal challenge already on the docket. Your court order is worth the paper it's on right now, which is not much. She held his gaze. I'm telling you this because you're a contractor doing a job, and the man who hired you did not tell you the full legal situation. That's his problem. Don't let it become yours. He looked at her for another long moment. Then he took 2 steps back and raised his phone. Malcolm moved up beside her quietly. You're supposed to be in the car, he said under his breath. I was in the car, she said. Now I'm here. Are you having contractions? No. You'd tell me, Malcolm. You wouldn't tell me. Contraction hit. Not the deep, stopping kind from the service corridor, smaller, tighter, the kind that had been intermittently present for 2 days, and that she had been attributing to the sustained physical and psychological stress of the week, and hoping consistently was nothing. She breathed through it with her hand flat against her side, and her face pointed at the gate, and her expression absolutely unchanged. Passed in 40 seconds. Malcolm had not looked away from her. I'm fine, she said. You're not fine. I'm standing. That's not the same thing. Behind them, a second vehicle pulled up Marcus's car, Si-hwan in the passenger seat. Marcus got out and came to stand with them. Si-hwan stayed in the car for 3 seconds, then got out too, and came to stand at a distance that was close enough to be present and far enough to be deferential, the specific distance of a man who has agreed to terms and is honoring them even when every instinct he has is telling him to take over. The contractor on the phone finished his call. He looked at the group assembled outside Rainier Eastport's East Gate 4 terminal security personnel. Malcolm, Amara, Marcus, and Si-hwan standing slightly apart, and he made the calculation that Amara had been betting he would make. He nodded to his 2 colleagues. They got back in the SUV. He looked at Amara one more time. This isn't over, he said. Call your client, she said. Tell him it is. The SUV pulled out. Malcolm exhaled. Marcus said something quietly into his phone. Amara stood at the gate and felt the cold air moving in off the water and pressed her hand harder against her side and breathed. The federal agents arrived at 5:34. There were 6 of them in 2 vehicles with the specific economy of movement of people who have been briefed thoroughly and have a clear operational picture. The lead agent, a woman named Rourke, mid-40s, hair pulled back, a face built for delivering information, without editorializing, spoke first to Selena, a sound like green minutes behind the federal vehicle, and was standing near the gate with her document case, and the look of someone who has been awake for 22 hours and has elected to feel that later. Then Rourke came to Amara. The secondary authentication system, she said without preamble. The archive release, did it transmit completely? Si-hwan authenticated at 4:51, Amara said. The system confirmed transmission. We need to verify the bypass is actually dead before we can confirm the terminal is secure. Rourke looked at the gate. The contractors that were here, they leave voluntarily? Yes. We'll want a statement on that. She looked at Amara more carefully. Ms. Lennox, are you all right? I'm fine. You're holding your side. Muscle tension. She dropped her hand. What do you need from me? Rourke looked at her for a beat, in the way that people look at pregnant women who are clearly not fine and have clearly decided that being not fine is not going to be relevant to the next several hours. We need to locate Tamok, she said. We have a warrant. We believe he's at the customs facility on the south end of the island, the abandoned Beck facility. That's where the secondary system's physical infrastructure is housed. Amara looked at Si-hwan, who was still standing at his distance, with his hands in his pockets and his face doing the thing it did when he was listening to everything. Si-hwan, she said. He came forward. She watched him give Rourke the layout of the customs facility, the access points, the security infrastructure from 10 years ago that may or may not have been updated, the specific room where the authentication hardware was housed. He gave it cleanly and completely, without negotiation, without the performance of cooperations designed to generate goodwill. Just information, delivered to someone who needed it. Rourke listened. She asked 2 follow-up questions. Then she went back to her team. Si-hwan came to stand near Amara. Not beside her, just near. He'll be there, Si-hwan said. He won't leave until he confirms whether the bypass worked. He'll know soon enough. Si-hwan was quiet. Then what happened in there, the archive? I know, she said. It was the right thing, yes. It doesn't feel the way I expected it to feel. She looked at him sideways. What did you expect? He thought about it. I don't know. Something cleaner. Nothing about this has been clean, she said. Another contraction. Harder this time. She put her hand on Malcolm's arm without meaning to, just a reflex. Contact. The body asking for an anchor. Malcolm looked at her immediately. His hand came up under her elbow. How long? He said quietly. I don't know, she breathed. They've been coming and going for 2 days. It's probably just... How far apart? She tried to remember, the one at the gate. Before that, in the elevator coming down. Before that, in the car on the bridge. 20 minutes, she said. Maybe 15. Malcolm looked at her with the face of a man who has run out of patience for a particular category of argument. We're going to the hospital, he said. The federal team isn't finished. Amara. Selena can handle. Amara. He said her name the same way he'd been saying it since they were 9 years old, and she was doing something that would get one or both of them hurt. Flat, certain, done. She looked at the terminal gate. Raymond Chu had arrived and was talking with 2 of his security personnel. Federal vehicles were moving toward the south end of the island. The east gate was closed and locked. Rainier Eastport was standing. 5 minutes, she said. 3, Malcolm said. She found Marcus. You have operational control from this point. The trustees are on call. Selena has the emergency authority documentation. Don't make any decisions you can't defend to the board. Understood. He looked at her. Go. She found Selena. Taymok is at the south facility. Federal team is moving. I need you to be the point of contact from here. Already am. Selena looked at her properly for the first time since the boardroom. You're having contractions. I'm going to the hospital. Good. Selena touched her arm briefly, the first personal gesture she had made in their entire working relationship. Go have your son, Amara. She turned to find Si-hwan standing 3 feet away. They looked at each other. The hospital, he said. Yes. He opened his mouth. She said, You're not authorized. I haven't listed you. You'll have to wait. His jaw worked. She saw it, the old instinct, the reflexive reach for authority. The word husband forming somewhere behind his eyes. Then she watched him put it down. I'll be there, he said. I'll wait. She nodded once. Then she walked to Malcolm's car. Across the south end of Harbor Island, in the abandoned bake customs facility that smelled of salt rust and old machinery, Kwan Taymok sat in front of a hardware terminal that had not yet confirmed whether the bypass was alive or dead. He was 54 years old, and he had built his network through 17 years of controlled patience and strategic violence, and the particular intelligence of a man who understood that the most dangerous weapon in any conflict is the willingness to wait longer than your opponent believes you can. He was not waiting now. He was watching a progress bar on a screen that had stopped moving 11 minutes ago. His phone had rung 4 times in the last 20 minutes. He had not answered it. The contractors at the East Gate were not his primary mechanism. They were pressure, misdirection, a way to force Amara Lennox and her trustees to divide their attention while the bypass completed. The bypass was completing. The progress bar had not moved in 11 minutes. He picked up the authentication token, the one Hayrin had brought him, the one she'd taken from the Beck Meridian boardroom table, the one that was supposed to be unlocking the secondary pathway right now. He turned it over in his hand. Then the screen changed. Not the progress bar. A different screen entirely, a red system notification in the legacy interface format that hadn't been used by Bake Meridian in 9 years. Archive authentication received. Originating administrator Bake Si-hwan. Derivative pathway termination initiated. All secondary authorization sequences suspended. Transaction rejected. Taymok read it twice. He set the token down on the terminal surface. He looked at the screen for a long moment with the expression of a man who is recalculating the totality of a situation rather than a single element of it. Then he heard the vehicles outside. He stood. He moved to the facility's single window and looked out at the industrial road, where 2 dark SUVs had stopped and 6 people in federal authority vests were getting out with the economy of movement that meant they had already decided what they were doing and were not interested in negotiation. He looked at the token on the terminal. He looked at the door. He sat back down. He picked up his phone and called his attorney. Hayrin was taken into federal custody at 5:51 at the Bake Meridian building, where she had been held in a conference room under Marcus's supervision since the boardroom confrontation. She walked out between two federal agents with her coat still on and her chin still up and her face doing the complicated thing it had been doing since Si-hwan had looked away from her at the boardroom door. She did not look back at the building. Taemok was taken into custody at 6:04 at the Harbor Island facility, without incident, in the quiet way of a man who has already completed the calculation and understands that the next phase requires a different kind of patience. At 6:12, the first workers of the Rainier Eastport morning shift began arriving through the terminal's main gate. Raymond Chu's supervisor checked IDs and waved them through, the way he did every morning, in the ordinary rhythm of a port that had not stopped working and would not stop working. Because the people who had spent the night preventing exactly that had managed, by the narrowest available margin, to succeed. None of the workers knew. They parked their cars and clocked in and walked to their stations, and the terminal opened on time, the way it always did, because that was what it was built to do. Malcolm drove fast, and the hospital was 12 minutes from Harbor Island, and Amara spent those 12 minutes with her hand pressed against her side and her eyes on the road ahead and her mind doing the thing minds do when they have been in motion. For so long that stillness feels like a different kind of emergency. She thought about the boardroom. She thought about the gate. She thought about Selena's hand on her arms. She thought about Si-hwan sitting in a hospital waiting to leave, and no authority to enter and choosing, for the first time she could recall, to simply sit. The contractions were 12 minutes apart, then 10. Malcolm said, "Talk to me. I'm talking. You're staring." "I'm thinking. Talk instead." She looked at him. "I'm scared," she said. He glanced at her. "About the baby?" "About all of it." She pressed her hand harder against her side. "I've been so focused on doing the next thing that I haven't." She stopped. "He's early. He's 4 weeks early. And I'm going to a hospital in the middle of the night, and I haven't finished nursery. And I don't." "Hey." Malcolm's voice was quiet and very even. "He's going to be fine." "You don't know that." "No. But he's got your stubbornness, so the math is good." She almost laughed, almost. Another contraction. 8 minutes. They were getting closer together. "Drive faster," she said. Malcolm drove faster. The hospital's maternity intake moved quickly. A wheelchair, at the entrance that Amara did not argue about, for once. A triage nurse, who asked the questions in the practice efficient way of someone who has triaged 1,000 admissions and understands that the patient's insistence that they are fine is diagnostic information rather than accurate reporting. Her blood pressure was elevated. The baby's heart rate dipped twice during the initial monitoring brief, correcting itself each time. A sound like enough for the attending physician to use the word concerning with the particular weight that attending physicians give to words they want you to hear properly. A sound like green wood splitting. Amara lay in the monitoring room with the leads on her stomach and the sound of her son's heartbeat filling the space, and felt the specific vertigo of a person who has been in control of everything for 6 weeks and is now lying in a hospital bed, being told that the next set of decisions is not hers to make. She called Selena Taemok, in custody. 6:04. Selena's voice was doing something almost human at its edges. The terminal opened on time. "Good," she paused. "I need you to contact the independent trustees. Emergency session. Give Marcus full operational authority, pending Amara." "I have it." "Stop. The Jiangsu authority suspension should be documented before." "Amara." Selena's voice was as firm as she had ever heard it. "You are in a hospital. I have everything. Stop working." Amara looked at the ceiling. "Okay," she said. She ended the call. She lay in the monitoring room, with her son's heartbeat in her ears, and the exhaustion of the last 6 weeks finally arriving all at once, settling into her like water into low ground, finding every hollow place she'd been too busy to feel. The nurse came back. The attending physician came back. They used another word, 2 words, cesarean section. Not immediately, but soon. The baby's heart rate was dipping with each contraction, and the pattern was consistent enough that waiting was a risk the physician was not willing to take. Amara absorbed this information. She asked the questions she needed to ask: gestational age viability, neonatal team readiness, anesthesia timeline, recovery parameters. The physician answered all of them with the respect of someone who recognizes a person who needs real information rather than comfort. Then the room got quiet. Amara put her hand on her stomach flat, both palms, feeling the particular warmth of her own skin over the shape of her son. Almost, she said quietly, to him. We're almost done. In the waiting room down the hall, Si-hwan sat in a plastic chair with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. And he was not praying, and he was not strategizing, and he was not performing anything for anyone. He was simply a man sitting in a waiting room not knowing, which was the one experience his entire life had been constructed specifically to prevent. And he was sitting inside it anyway, because he had run out of alternatives. And, because somewhere behind a set of doors he was not permitted to enter, the person carrying his child had not authorized him, and he understood, with a clarity that felt like something breaking open in his chest, that being Nolan's father was going to require learning how to wait in rooms he hadn't been invited into. The clock on the waiting room wall read 2:31 in the morning. Amara's surgery was scheduled for 2:45. And 16 minutes later, in an operating room that smelled of antiseptic and cool recycled air, the attending physician looked up and said, "We need to move now. The heart rate is dropping, and it's not recovering." The operating room was very cold and very bright, and Amara had not expected either of those things to matter as much as they did. She had thought she was prepared. She had read the materials, attended the classes, memorized the sequence of events the way stated. She memorized everything that mattered methodically, completely, leaving nothing to surprise. But the cold of the table against her back, and the hard white light overhead, and the specific quality of stillness that descends when a room full of professionals is focused entirely on keeping two people alive. None of that had been in the materials. The anesthesiologist was named Dr. Patel. He had a calm, unhurried voice, and he explained each step before he performed it, which was the most useful thing anyone had done for her in the last 6 hours. "You'll feel pressure," he told her, "not pain. Pressure." "Okay," she said. "If it becomes pain, tell me immediately." "I will. Is there someone you want called in?" She thought about the waiting room. She thought about Si-hwan in the plastic chair. "My cousin," she said. "Malcolm Lennox. He's in the waiting room. I'll have someone bring him to the anteroom. He can be close. Thank you." The curtain went up. Dr. Reyes, the attending, moved into position with the particular economy of someone for whom this procedure was muscle memory, and still always serious. The ceiling, and breathed the way she had practiced and felt beneath the anesthesia and the cold, and the fear she was not performing away from herself successfully, the specific gravity of a moment that would divide her life permanently into before and after. Pressure came. She breathed. 40 seconds later, she heard her son. It was not the strong, immediate cry she had imagined from the materials. It was smaller than that, thinner, with the particular quality of a sound produced by lungs that had not yet fully decided to work. But it was there, and it was real, and it filled the operating room with the specific weight of a person arriving. She turned her head toward the sound. She could not see him yet. The neonatal team was moving fast, 3 of them around the warming station, voices clipped and professional. Dr. Reyes was still working, talking to the scrub nurse, in the shorthand of people who don't stop. She started. "He's breathing," Dr. Patel said from above her shoulder. "They're working with him. Give them a moment." She gave them a moment. It was the longest moment of her life. Then one of the neonatal nurses turned and brought him close enough for Amara to see wrapped tight, his face compressed and red and furious in the way of newborns who have just been evicted from the only world they knew. His eyes were closed. His hands were fisted against his chest. It was 4 weeks early, and he weighed 5 pounds 11 ounces, and he was the most complete thing she had ever seen. "Nolan," she said quietly, not to anyone in particular. The nurse said, "We need to take him to the NICU. His oxygen saturation needs support. But he's breathing on his own. Can I?" Just for a second. They brought him close enough that she could press her lips against his forehead. He smelled of something she had no adequate word for. warm and specific and entirely his own. Then they took him away. She lay on the table and listened to the room doing what it needed to do and felt the particular desolation of a person whose most important work has just moved beyond their reach and into other hands, and she breathed and she let it be what it was. Malcolm was in the anteroom when they wheeled her to recovery. He was sitting in a chair that was too small for him, with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped and his face doing the private, unguarded thing it only did when he believed no one was watching. When he looked up and saw her, something moved across his features, very quickly relief, she thought, and something older than relief. "He's in the NICU," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected. "Breathing on his own. Oxygen support." Malcolm nodded. He reached over and put his hand over hers without saying anything. They sat like that for a while. "Si-hwan," she said finally. "Still in the waiting room. Tell him Nolan is here. Tell him he's breathing." She paused. "Tell him to go home and come back at 7. Malcolm looked at her. "He's not coming in tonight," she said. Not with anger, just with the flat certainty of a woman who has made a decision and will not revisit it at 4 a.m. in a recovery room. "There's a nurse protocol. I haven't authorized him. He knows that." She looked at the ceiling. "Tell him Nolan is here and he's breathing, and to come back at 7. Malcolm squeezed her hand once, then he stood and went. She lay in the recovery room and listened to the building around her. The quiet machinery of a hospital at 4 a.m, the particular hush of a place that is always, at every hour, doing serious work, and she did not sleep, and she did not cry, and she did not think about anything except the weight of that small, warm forehead against her lips, and the specific sound of that first thin cry, and the fact that he was 4 weeks early and 5 pounds 11 ounces, and all of it here. Si-hwan received the message in the waiting room. Malcolm delivered it in person, standing in the doorway, speaking in the direct, minimal way he communicated when he wanted there to be no ambiguity. "He's here, he's breathing. She says come back at 7. Si-hwan absorbed this, both parts of it. He nodded. He sat in the waiting room for another 20 minutes without moving. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and walked to the elevator. In the lobby, he stopped at the reception desk and wrote his name and his son's name on a visitor log that no one had asked him to sign, because he needed to do something with his hands, and that was what was available. Then he went to his car and sat in the parking structure and did not drive anywhere for a long time. He was not certain what he was feeling. He had spent his entire adult life in environments where feelings were managed rather than felt acknowledged briefly, analyzed for strategic implication, then stored where they could not interfere with function. He had been very good at this. He had believed it was a form of strength. Sitting in a parking structure at 4:30 in the morning, knowing his son was in a neonatal unit he was not permitted to enter, knowing the woman who had just undergone surgery for that son had specifically excluded him, not out of cruelty. He understood that now, but out of the same precise, unsentimentalized accounting she applied to everything. He understood that the management system he had built was not strength. It was just distance. And distance had cost him everything that mattered. He put his head back against the headrest and closed his eyes. He did not sleep. He sat with what he had, which was not much, and he stayed with it, because there was nothing else to do. At 6:45, he drove back to the hospital entrance and waited for 7 o'clock. Nolan spent 18 days in the neonatal intensive care unit. The oxygen support came off on day 4. By day 7, he was maintaining his own temperature. By day 12, he had gained 9 ounces, and the neonatal team's language had shifted from monitoring closely to doing well, which was not the same as simple but was the direction that mattered. Amara was there every day, from the moment she was cleared to move. She learned the rhythm of the NICU the way she learned everything, by paying attention, by asking specific questions, by understanding the system she was operating inside. She learned which nurses worked, which shifts, what each monitor's numbers meant, the particular way Nolan's face changed when he was hungry versus when he was overstimulated, the exact amount of pressure he preferred when she placed her finger against his palm and felt his tiny hand close around it. She did not let herself think past the next day for the first week. The next feeding, The next weight check. The next conversation with Dr. Park, the neonatologist, whose manner was precise and whose information was always complete. She called her mother in Atlanta on day 2. That conversation lasted 47 minutes, and Amara cried through most of it, which was fine, because her mother had raised her to understand that crying was not the same as breaking, and that there was a significant difference between falling apart and simply releasing pressure that had built past the point of healthy containment. "He's beautiful," her mother asked. "He's so small," Amara said. "He's so small and She stopped. "He's already himself. You can already tell. He already has opinions." Her mother laughed. "Of course he does. Look who his mother is." Si-hwan came at 7 every morning. The first 3 days, Amara allowed him to stand at the glass. She watched him from inside, the way he stood, hands in his pockets, face unperformed in the way that faces become when they believe they're not being observed. He stood at the glass and looked at his son with an expression she had no single word for. It was not guilt, though guilt was part of it. It was not grief, though that was there too. It was the expression of a man who is looking at something he cannot control or purchase or protect through the exercise of authority, something that exists completely independently of him and is entirely dependent on him, simultaneously, and is trying to locate himself in relation to it. On day 4, she sent a nurse to tell him he could come in. He washed his hands at the sink, outside the unit, with the focused attention of a man performing a task that matters. He dried them carefully. He came to stand beside the incubator and looked at Nolan for a moment without touching anything. Then he looked at Amara. He started. "One hand," she said. "One finger." He reached in. He placed his index finger against Nolan's palm with the particular gentleness of a large man who is afraid of his own size in the presence of something fragile. Nolan's hand closed around it. Si-hwan lowered his head. His shoulders moved once, a single involuntary compression that he did not try to control or conceal. Then he was still, with his head down and his finger held by his son and his face doing something she had only seen once before, in a hospital room years ago after their second loss, when he had not known she was watching. She looked away and let him have it. The first real conversation happened on day 6. They were both in the NICU, Amara in the reclining chair beside the incubator, Si-hwan in the straight-back chair the nurses had quietly placed for him near the wall. Nolan was sleeping. The monitors beeped in their soft, steady way. Si-hwan said, "Jong-soo called me." "I know," Amara said. "He told me what you said to him. The night he signed." She didn't respond. "He said you told him. Signing didn't make him responsible for my choices." He looked at his hands, folded in his lap. "That it just meant he wasn't letting them stand." "That's what I said." "Did you mean it? That the choices were separate? The divorce, the trustees?" "Yes." She kept her eyes on Nolan. "I didn't collapse them together to hurt you more effectively. Sason, they were always separate. You made personal choices, and you made criminal choices, and they happened to overlap, but they were never the same thing. Most people would have used them together. I'm not most people." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "you're not." The monitors beeped. Nolan shifted in his sleep, a small whole-body movement, his fists uncurling briefly and then closing again. "I'm going to be convicted," Si-hwan said. Not dramatically. Just factually. Probably. The federal exposure, the archive release confirmed the original intent. There's no argument that holds after that. I know. I did it anyway. I know that too. He looked at her then. Directly. The way he hadn't looked at her in years. Without calculation, without management, without the careful positioning of a man who is always also running a secondary assessment of how he appears. "I need you to know it wasn't about Rin," he said. "The trust, the transfer, it wasn't about her. He stopped. She was what I let happen to us. But the Taymok arrangement was about the network. About territory. About a rivalry I couldn't resolve through legitimate means and couldn't walk away from." He paused. "That doesn't make it better. I know that. I just need you to understand that I didn't destroy our marriage for her. I destroyed it for something that turned out to be worth even less." Amara sat with that for a moment. "That doesn't actually change anything," she said. "I know, it's just a different reason." "Yes, but thank you for saying it." She looked at Nolan. I think I needed to know it wasn't her specifically. Si-hwan nodded once. He looked back at his son. They sat in the NICU in the particular quiet of two people who have said the necessary things and arrived together at the place where the necessary things run out and only the facts remain. The second betrayal arrived on day 9. Selena brought it herself, which told Amara it was the kind of information that needed to be delivered in person. She came to the hospital in the afternoon, sat across from Amara in the family lounge outside the NICU, and placed a document on the table between them. Jong-soo hired Hae-rin, Selena said. Amara looked at her. Not recently. 3 years ago. Selena's voice was level and careful. He retained her through a private consulting arrangement separate from anything connected to Bake Meridian or the trust. His purpose, as documented in the original retainer agreement, was to place her in Si-hwan's professional orbit in a capacity that would allow her to observe and report on whether Si-hwan was misusing company accounts. The lounge was quiet. Down the hall, a baby was crying in another unit. He hired her as a test, Amara said. Effectively, yes. He was concerned about Si-hwan's management of certain discretionary accounts. He wanted independent verification without alerting Si-hwan directly. Selena folded her hands. What Jong-soo did not anticipate was that the situation would develop the way it did. That Hae-rin would become personally involved. That Si-hwan would begin routing actual protected funds through her company. That what began as an observation arrangement would become a mechanism for the very misconduct Jong-soo had been trying to detect. And when it did, Amara asked, when it went past observation. Selena was quiet for a beat. He concealed it. He knew his original hiring of her would look like complicity. He knew that disclosing it would implicate him in the chain of events. So he made the choice to say nothing and hope the situation resolved without his involvement becoming visible. Amara looked at the document. She did not pick it up. He sat across from me in his kitchen, she said. He told me he was ashamed of what his son had become. He held my eyes and said that. I know. And the entire time he knew that he had put the match in the room. Yes. Amara sat back. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, the particular ceiling of a hospital family lounge, acoustic tile and fluorescent diffusers, the architecture of waiting. How did you find it? She said, the federal investigation. When they pulled Hae-rin's full financial history as part of the cooperation agreement she's negotiating, the original retainer surfaced. Selena paused. She disclosed it voluntarily. I think she wanted him accountable. She gets something in return. Her cooperation is being considered for a reduced charge. But the disclosure was her initiative. Amara was quiet for a long time. He has automatic trustee authority, she said finally. Yes, that needs to be removed. I've drafted the motion. Selena touched the document on the table. Requires your signature as Nolan's representative. Amara picked up the document. She read it not quickly, not as a formality, but the way she read everything that mattered, completely and with attention. Then she signed it. She set the pen down. I want to speak to him before it's filed, she said. Of course. Today, Jong-soo came to the hospital that evening. He arrived the way he always arrived, with the bearing of a man accustomed to the weight of his own authority. And when he walked into the family lounge and saw Amara's face, he understood immediately that the conversation was going to be different from the others. He sat down. Amara placed the original retainer document on the table between them. He looked at it for a long time without touching it. When did you know, she said. Not did you know. She was past that. When the federal team began pulling Hae-rin's records, he said. I knew it would surface. That's not what I asked. He folded his hands on the table. I knew the arrangement had gone wrong approximately 8 months ago. When I saw the Yoon Consulting Group begin appearing in certain internal reports, I understood then that what I had set in motion had... He stopped. Ceded my intentions. Your intentions, Amara said. I was trying to protect the company. You were trying to protect your legacy, she said. You didn't trust your son, and you didn't trust the structure you'd built, and so you installed a monitor without telling anyone. And then, when the monitor became the problem, you decided protecting yourself from responsibility was more important than stopping the damage. She looked at him steadily. You sat in my kitchen and let me believe you were an ally, and the entire time you knew you had created the conditions for everything that happened. I signed the injunction, or I asked you to, after I drove to your house at midnight and made the case for your own grandson's protection. Her voice remained even. Not hot, just clear. You didn't come to me. You waited until there was no other option, and then you did the minimum required. Jong-soo was quiet. I am not going to make you responsible for Si-hwan's choices, she said. He made them. They belong to him. But I am going to hold you responsible for yours. She tapped the document. Your automatic trustee authority is being removed. You'll retain an advisory position. I'm not stripping you of a relationship with your grandson, and I'm not burning the company structure your father built, but you will not have transactional authority over anything that touches Nolan's future. Not ever. He looked at the document. I could contest it, he said. Not as a threat, as a statement of fact. You could, she said. It would be expensive and visible, and the federal investigation would likely expand to include your role in the Hae-rin arrangement as a result. She held his gaze. Or you could accept it and spend whatever time you have left being a grandfather to your grandson, on whatever terms I determine are safe for him. The lounge was very quiet. Jong-soo looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked at the document. He was 68 years old, and he had built something that had outlasted his control of it, and he was sitting across from his daughter-in-law, his former daughter-in-law, who was 36 days post-operative, and had spent the last 3 weeks in NICU chair, and had just held him accountable with the same methodical, unapologetic precision with which she had held everyone else accountable. And he understood, in the particular way that understanding arrives, when it is too late to change the events that produced it, that he had never taken her seriously enough. That had been his most expensive mistake. I accept the terms, he said. He did not ask her to forgive him. She did not offer. Nolan came home on day 18. It was a Tuesday in November, cold and clear, the kind of Seattle day, where the light has a particular angle to it that makes everything look slightly more precise than usual. Amara carried him through the hospital's main doors in a car seat that seemed dramatically oversized for a baby, who still weighed just under 7 pounds, and Malcolm held the door scene and didn't say anything, and her mother, who had flown in from Atlanta on day 15 and had been sleeping on Amara's Capitol Hill apartment couch with the quiet, efficient presence of a woman who understands that the most useful thing she can offer is proximity, took a photograph on the front steps that Amara would keep for the rest of her life. The nursery had been finished. Malcolm and her mother had done it while Amara was at the hospital. She came home to a completed room. The crib assembled, the glider chair put together, the mobile hanging above the crib, turning slowly in the air from the heating vent. They hadn't asked permission. They had just done it. She stood in the doorway of the nursery for a long moment, with Nolan in the car seat in her hand, and looked at what the room had become, and felt something move through her chest that was not quite any single emotion, but contained all of them: grief, and gratitude, and exhaustion, and the particular terrifying sweetness of a future that is no longer hypothetical. She set the car seat on the floor and unstrapped him and lifted him against her chest. There, she said quietly, this is yours. The legal proceedings moved on their own timeline, the way legal proceedings do, slowly, with the bureaucratic patience of a system that is not designed for the people inside it but functions nonetheless. So, 8 months after Nolan's birth, Kwon Tae-mok was convicted on federal charges of fraud, extortion, and criminal conspiracy. The Rainier Eastport scheme was documented in detail in the federal record: the manufactured default mechanism, the private contractor operatives, the secondary authentication bypass. His sentencing hearing lasted 2 days. He received 11 years. Hae-rin pleaded guilty to conspiracy and wire fraud. Her cooperation had been substantive: the Jong-soo retainer disclosure, the full documentation of the Tae-mok communication chain, the authentication bypass technical specifications. Her sentence was reduced significantly. She served 14 months and was released on supervised probation. Amara did not attend either hearing. She read the verdicts when Selena sent them and acknowledged each one with a brief response, and put her phone face down and went to where Nolan was and held him for a while. Si-hwan's sentencing was different. She went to that one. She sat in the gallery, not the front row, with Malcolm beside her and Selena 2 seats down, and she watched Si-hwan stand before the federal judge with his attorney and listen to the terms of his accountability read into the public record. Full restitution to the Baek Legacy Trust, permanent removal from all trustee positions and executive authority over protected assets. 12 months in federal custody, with early release contingent on continued cooperation with the ongoing Taemak network investigation. The judge asked if the defendant wished to make a statement. Si-hwan stood. He did not look at Amara. He spoke to the court in the direct, unperformed way of someone who has decided that the only remaining honest transaction available is the one happening right now. He said he had understood the trust funds were protected. He said he had proceeded anyway. He said he had constructed the arrangement to benefit himself at the expense of the people his family had built obligations to, and that no account of his motivations competitive, personal, or otherwise changed the nature of what he had done. He said he intended to begin the work of becoming a person his son would not be ashamed of. He did not ask the court for leniency. He sat down. The judge sentenced him. Amara sat in the gallery and looked at the man she had married and did not feel the thing she had expected to feel. Not relief, not vindication, not the completion of something that had been building for months. What she felt was quieter than any of those. The specific, settling stillness of a process that has run its full course and arrived exactly where it needed to arrive, at the cost it was always going to cost. Without any of the parties involved being able to claim it had been easy. Outside the courthouse, Selena stood with her beside Malcolm's car. "The trustee transition documents are ready to file," Selena said. "Whenever you're ready." "Next week," Amara said. "I want to read them one more time." Selena nodded. "You know," Selena said, "you could keep the authority. There's a legitimate case for extending your representation. The independent board is capable, but you've been—" "No," Amara said. Selena stopped. "I didn't do this to sit in that chair," Amara said. "I did this so the chair wouldn't matter. The board is good. Marcus is good. Nolan's interests are protected." She looked at the courthouse steps. "I'm not building another version of what I took apart." Selena was quiet for a moment. Then next week, she said, "The year Si-hwan was in custody, he wrote Nolan one letter every month. He wrote them in longhand, on plain paper, and mailed them to the address Amara had provided through her attorney. She read each one before filing it in a box she kept on the top shelf of the nursery closet. He did not write them to her. He was careful about that, consistently careful, but he wrote them knowing she would read them first. And so they had the particular quality of letters written for 2 audiences simultaneously, the one addressed and the one watching. He wrote about small things, a book he was reading, a memory from his own childhood, not the authority and the organization and the weight of everything that had come later, but earlier things, smaller things. A fishing trip with Jong-soo when he was 11, the first cargo ship he'd ever boarded, a teacher who had been kind to him once in a way he hadn't thought about in 30 years. He wrote about Nolan without ever having met him properly, imagining him, constructing him from the one photograph Amara had allowed through the attorney channel. He wrote about things he hoped to show him someday. He was specific about the word hope. He never used will. He understood the difference. Amara read every letter. She felt different things reading them at different times. Some months she felt something adjacent to sorrow, not for herself, not for the marriage, but for the person who could write like this and had spent years being someone who didn't. Some months she felt nothing except the clinical attention of a woman assessing information for safety. Some months, when Nolan was having a difficult night and she was very tired and the apartment was very quiet, she felt the particular complicated thing that has no clean name, the grief of a love that was real and is over, the 2 facts coexisting without canceling each other. She never responded to the letters, but she kept them all. He was released on a Thursday in October, 11 months into the 12-month sentence. Called his attorney. He called Jong-soo briefly. He did not call Amara. He filed the supervised visitation request through the proper channels, as the agreement stipulated. He attended the mandatory orientation session. He appeared for his first supervised visit on a Saturday morning, on time in a small family center room with a social worker present and a toy box in the corner and a window that looked out at a parking lot. Amara brought Nolan. Nolan was 14 months old. He had Amara's eyes and what appeared to be Si-hwan's stubbornness, a combination that had already proven itself in the matter of refusing pureed vegetables with an imperious confidence that was both exhausting and recognizable. He walked, not steadily, but with the committed, lurching determination of a person who has recently discovered that legs are capable of more than just sitting. He walked into the family center room and looked at the toy box. Then he looked at Si-hwan. Si-hwan was sitting in one of the small chairs, too large for it, with his hands on his knees and his face doing the unmanaged thing it had been doing since the hospital NICU glass. He looked at his son, at this person who was his son, who had his grandmother's jawline and a personality that was already entirely its own, and said nothing. Nolan stared at him for a moment with the frank, unfiltered assessment of a 14-month-old who has not yet learned to perform neutrality. Then he went to the toy box. Si-hwan sat very still and let that be what it was. The social worker made a note. Amara sat in the chair across the room and watched. Session lasted 45 minutes. When it was over, Si-hwan stood and looked at Amara across the small room with the particular expression of a man who wants to say something and understands that nothing available is adequate. "Thank you," he said, "for bringing him." "It's the agreement," she said. Aine paused. Still, she looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up Nolan's bag and held out her hand, and Nolan lurched over to her and grabbed two of her fingers, and they left. The visits continued every other Saturday. Si-hwan was never late. He brought nothing extravagant, small, age-appropriate things that he had clearly researched, because they were always exactly right for what Nolan was interested in that particular week, which meant he was paying attention to the notes Amara provided through the attorney channel about Nolan's current developmental stage. He was paying attention. Nolan, for his part, conducted his own assessment of the situation on his own timeline, with the sovereign indifference of a small person who has not been told what to feel about anything and is therefore feeling his way toward it without interference. For the first 6 weeks, he mostly ignored Si-hwan in favor of the toys. Then one Saturday, Si-hwan arrived with a small plastic truck blue with one wheel that didn't spin correctly because the manufacturing was slightly off. He showed Nolan the truck. Nolan took it. He turned it over. He turned it back. He pushed it across the floor and watched the 3 wheels roll and the 4th one drag, and looked up at Si-hwan with an expression that communicated very clearly that this was unacceptable. He held it up. "Fix," he said. Si-hwan looked at the truck. He looked at Amara. She gave him nothing, no permission, no guidance, just the neutral attention of a woman watching a situation unfold. Nolan had asked him. Si-hwan took the truck. He spent 6 minutes on it, examining the axle assembly, using the edge of his thumbnail, adjusting the wheel's fit with the patient attention of a man who has nothing else to be doing and nowhere else he would rather be. When the wheel rolled correctly, he set the truck on the floor and gave it a small push. It rolled straight and even across the linoleum. Nolan watched it. Then he laughed, a full, complete, whole-body laugh that involved his entire face and both his fists, and a sound that was the most uncomplicated thing in the room. He ran after the truck. Si-hwan watched him go. Amara watched Si-hwan. What was on his face then was not the expression she had seen in the boardroom, or at the courthouse, or through the NICU glass. It was something newer than any of those, something that had not had occasion to exist before. The specific, a sound like green wood splitting, has been allowed access to a man who has been allowed access to something that cannot be purchased or commanded or obtained through any of the methods he had spent his life mastering. He had been allowed in because a 14-month-old had decided to ask him to fix a truck. That was all. That was enough. Nolan came back. He pushed the truck toward Si-hwan. Si-hwan pushed it back. Nolan ran after it, fell, got up without looking to see if anyone had noticed, ran after the truck again. Then he fell differently harder this time, catching his knee on the floor edge, and he cried out with the immediate full-volume distress of a small person for whom pain is still a genuine surprise. He ran past Si-hwan without looking at him. He ran to Amara. She caught him and held him, and the crying lasted 45 seconds, and then it was over. She looked up to find Si-hwan still where he'd been, one hand on the floor where the truck had stopped rolling, watching his son recover in his mother's arms. He did not say anything. He did not stand or move toward them, or assert any claim over any part of the moment. He waited. When Nolan had fully recovered, which took approximately 90 seconds, and the discovery of a different toy Amara reached into the bag and pulled out the packet of wipes without being asked, kind of reflex that comes from months of constant proximity to a small person who is always somehow dirty. She held them toward Si-hwan. He looked at her hand. Then he took the wipes. It was not a gesture of forgiveness. She knew he understood that. It was not reconciliation or the beginning of reconciliation or anything that could be traced forward into a future that contained them together. It was wipes. It was just this. 2 years after she had signed the divorce papers, Amara returned to the Bake Meridian building for the final trustee meeting. She took the elevator to the 42nd floor. She walked into the boardroom, the same long table, though the configuration had changed. No head position. The trustees sat in a circle, a modification she had requested 18 months earlier, and that had been maintained since. The silver pin she had used on the divorce papers was on the marble counter by the window. She had no idea how it had gotten there. Perhaps it had always been there, and she had simply not registered it before. She picked it up. The transfer of authority documents were 22 pages. Selena had reviewed them 4 times. The independent board had reviewed them twice. Marcus had reviewed the operational implications and had sent a 2-paragraph note saying, essentially, that the structure was sound and he was grateful. She signed each page that required her signature. At the end, Jong-soo attending as an advisory observer, as per the modified terms, with no transactional authority said, "You could keep it." "You said that once before," she said. "I mean it more now." "I mean it less." She set the pen down. "The board is good. Nolan's interests are protected. Rainier Eastport filed its strongest revenue quarter in 6 years last month." She looked at him. "The structure works without me. That's how it should be." Jong-soo looked at her for a moment with an expression that was difficult to read, something between respect and loss and the particular grief of a man who understands that the best thing his family has produced is in the process of leaving it. "He's lucky," Jong-soo said, "Nolan, to have you." Amara considered this. "He's lucky to have people who are going to be honest with him," she said, "including about where he came from and what it cost. I'm going to tell him the truth when he's old enough. About his father. About his grandfather. About all of it." She picked up her bag. "Not to damage anything. Just so he knows what things actually are, rather than what they look like." She said goodbye to the trustees. She shook Marcus's hand. Took the elevator down. In the waterfront garden, later that afternoon, the November light was doing the same thing it had done on the morning. She brought Nolan home cutting at a specific angle that made everything look precise, considered, like the world had taken a moment to get itself in order. Si-hwan was already there when she arrived. He was sitting on a bench near the path, and he stood when he saw her coming with Nolan on her hip. Nolan saw him and immediately began making the sound he made when he recognized someone. Not a word yet, just a particular vocalization of acknowledgement that he produced for a small number of people. He squirmed to get down. She set him down. He ran. Not steadily. He was not yet a steady runner, and the path had a slight grade to it that complicated his trajectory. But with absolute commitment, the full-body investment in forward motion that is the specific province of 18-month-olds, who have not yet learned to hold anything in reserve. He reached Si-hwan and held up the blue truck. It was the same truck, repaired, well-traveled, missing a piece of its cab that had been lost somewhere between the family center and the apartment and had never been recovered. "Fix," Nolan said. Si-hwan crouched down to his level. He took the truck and looked at it carefully. "I don't think this one can be fixed," he said. Nolan considered this information. "Fix," he said again, less as a question this time. "I'll try," Si-hwan said. He sat down on the path on the actual ground, in his actual clothes, and turned the truck over and examined the remaining wheel assembly, with the focused attention of a man who has one task and intends to complete it properly. Amara sat on the bench. She watched her son lean against Si-hwan's knee while he worked. Not grabbing, not demanding, just the casual proximity of a small person who is still deciding how close to be and has moved one step closer than he was before. Si-hwan did not grab him back. He noticed it. Could see him notice it, the slight pause in his hands, and then he continued working on the truck and let Nolan decide the distance. The garden was quiet in the way that outdoor spaces in cities sometimes manage to be the background presence of traffic and weather and the distant machinery of the port, but underneath it, or within it, a specific quality of stillness. Amara looked at the water. She thought about the silver pen. She thought about the morals. She had picked it up and signed the papers. Si-hwan had walked away, believing she was weak and frightened, and probably in love with someone else, and how she had stood in the penthouse kitchen afterward and looked at the silver pen and understood, with a clarity that she had not expected to feel so soon, that what she was holding was not the end of something, but the beginning of something whose shape she could not yet see. She had not been signing away her future. She had been taking it back, not dramatically, not with the clean, cinematic resolution of a woman who has won and stands at the top of something, surveying the wreckage of her enemies. Just a woman at a kitchen counter, 33 weeks pregnant, with a silver pen in her steady hand and a decision already made and a long road in front of her that she intended to walk on her own terms. She had walked it. The road had been what roads are in Evan: expensive, longer than estimated, occasionally impassable and requiring rerouting. She had lost things she hadn't planned to lose. She had paid costs that had not been itemized in advance. There had been nights in the Capitol Hill apartment when the specific loneliness of a correct decision had been indistinguishable from the loneliness of a wrong one. She did not regret any of it, not because it had been worth it in the clean, redemptive way that stories sometimes promise, but because it had been hers. Every choice, every document, every midnight drive and every boardroom silence and every contraction she had breathed. Through against a concrete wall in a service corridor with her phone pressed to her side, getting the evidence she needed. Her son made a sound of satisfaction behind her. She turned. The truck was rolling again, all four wheels across the garden path, straight and even. Nolan chased it. He got it. He brought it back and pushed it toward Si-hwan's knee. Si-hwan pushed it back. They did this 3 more times. On the 4th return, Nolan pushed the truck and then, instead of watching it, turned and looked at his mother. He walked the 6 steps to the bench with the careful, committed gait of a small person navigating variable terrain and put both hands on her knee and looked up at her with his father's dark eyes and her own particular steadiness already beginning to form in the set of his small jaw. "Mama," he said. "Hi," she said. He patted her knee twice, the specific gesture he used when he was satisfied that something was where it was supposed to be, and then turned and walked back toward the truck. Amara watched him go. Si-hwan looked at her from across the garden path, not with longing, not with the performance of remorse, not with anything that was asking for something. Just looking. The way 2 people look at each other, when they have been through the same storm from different sides, and have both survived it, and are standing now in the aftermath, a little damaged, still standing. She looked back. She did not smile. He did not smile. They were not those people anymore. The people who had smiled at each other across a penthouse kitchen in the early years, when everything had seemed like it was going to be simple. Those people were gone, replaced by 2 people who were more accurate about the world and more honest about themselves, and carrying, each of them, the specific weight of everything they had chosen. It was not nothing. It was not what she had wanted. It was what remained after everything that wasn't real had been removed, and she had done the removing herself, and she was still here, and so was he. And between them, on a garden path in November, Nolan Lennox Bake was pushing a repaired blue truck toward the water and laughing at the sound it made on the stone. That was enough. That was more than enough. The silver pen was back in her bag. Her hand had not shaken when she signed. It never had.